Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the very first hours of life for livestock animals. It's a time when the race for survival is just incredibly intense. So, let's just kick things off with one number, 40%. That's a staggering figure, right? It's the percentage of newborn dairy calves that actually fail to get the critical immunity they so desperately need from their mothers. And that number, it just shines a huge spotlight on this massive and often invisible vulnerability. And that really gets you thinking, doesn't it? It leads us to the central question for today's explainer. Why? Why is the very start of life, those first few hours and days, the most dangerous time for these animals? Well, the answer is this complex dance between genetics, the environment, and a frantic ticking clock. To really get to the bottom of that, we have to look at the journey from the safety of the womb out into the world. It is a path that is just loaded with dangers. And that clock, well, it starts ticking the second that animal takes its first breath. And what's so fascinating here is that the dangers are totally different depending on the species. For little lambs, the biggest killer is the cold, hypothermia, and starvation. But for dairy calves, it's often septicemia, which is a really nasty bloodstream infection. And then for foals, you're looking at things like being born too early or just having a really difficult birth. So each one of them is facing its own unique set of challenges. To get a handle on all these threats, veterinarians have actually mapped them out on a timeline. In those first 48 hours, the big problems are usually non-infectious, things like low blood sugar or issues they were born with. But then, as you move into that first week, that's when the infectious diseases like septicemia and gut infections really become the main enemy, especially if that newborn's defenses aren't up to scratch. But here's the thing. The race for survival, it doesn't actually start at birth. No, it begins way before that, inside the womb, where the very blueprint for life can sometimes go wrong. So the first big hurdle we have to talk about are congenital defects. You can think of these as basically errors in the animal's developmental code. Sometimes they're inherited, but they can also be caused by things the mother was exposed to during her pregnancy, like certain toxins or viruses. And here's another huge risk that happens before birth: intrauterine growth retardation, or IUGR. This is when the fetus just doesn't grow the way it's supposed to. And it's not just about being born small, It's about being born underdeveloped, underprepared for the world, with a slower metabolism and less ability to even generate its own body heat. And look, this doesn't just happen randomly. IUGR is often triggered by very specific problems. Maybe the placenta wasn't working right and couldn't deliver enough nutrients, or the mother herself was malnourished or under heat stress. Even certain viral infections can cross that placental barrier and just wreak havoc on development. Okay, so now let's talk about the journey into the world itself. The process of birth is a moment of just immense physical stress, and for some, it's a challenge they simply can't overcome. A difficult birth, which is technically called dystocia, is a major, major threat. It can cause direct physical injuries, or even worse, it can cut off the oxygen supply. That's a condition called hypoxia. And the consequences of that can be immediate and absolutely devastating, leading to brain damage or even death. Yeah, and vets, there's like detectives. They've learned to spot the clues of a really rough birth. Meconium staining, for instance, is a huge red flag. Meconium is the newborn's first stool, and if it's passed while still inside the womb, it's a dead giveaway that the fetus was under extreme stress and probably starved for oxygen. So, let's say the newborn makes it through that perilous journey of birth. Well, the fight is far from over. Now it immediately faces an invisible army of germs and bacteria. And with basically no immune system of its own, its only hope is a defense that's borrowed from its mother. And this right here brings us to what is probably the single most critical factor and whether a newborn survives: passive immunity. Newborns are born without their own antibodies. They have to get them from their mother's first milk, which we call colostrum. If they fail to get enough of this liquid gold and get it in time, they are left totally defenseless. So for this whole system to work, it's like a three-part equation. First, the colostrum itself has to be good quality and they have to get enough of it. Second, the timing is absolutely crucial. The newborn's gut can only absorb these big antibody molecules for about 24 hours. And third, the gut itself has to be healthy enough to do the absorbing. If any one of those pieces fails, the whole thing falls apart. It's a disaster. And hey, remember that 40% we started with? This is where it comes from. You can see here that in dairy operations, where calves are often separated from their moms right at birth and fed by hand, the risk of this failure is incredibly high. Now, compare that to foals or lambs who usually stay with their mothers and nurse naturally. It's just a really stark reminder of how our management practices can have a huge impact on biology.
Okay, so with all of these dangers just stacked against them, you might be wondering, how do we even the odds? Well, this is where veterinary science and just plain good management come into play, tipping the scales back in favor of the newborn.
When a death does occur, it's not just a tragedy, it's a puzzle that has to be solved. Vets and farmers literally become investigators. They follow this strict 6-step protocol that looks at everything: the pregnancy, the mother's history, the postmortem findings, and a real deep dive into how the farm is run, all to find the root cause and make sure it doesn't happen again. But really, at the end of the day, the name of the game is prevention. You want to stop the fire before it even starts. That means clean, dry birthing areas, and, this is a big one, vaccinating the mothers while they're pregnant. Those vaccines boost the specific antibodies in her colostrum, basically creating a custom-made shield for her baby. Now, when prevention doesn't work, then you shift to intensive, round-the-clock care, antibiotics, IV fluids, nutritional support, the whole shebang. It's the last line of defense. So after all this, what's the big takeaway? You know, understanding this incredibly fragile, high-stakes race for survival really changes how you see things. It shows you not just the amazing biological hurdles these animals have to clear, but also the immense amount of care and science it takes to navigate that razor-thin margin between life and death. It's a journey that starts long, long before our food ever makes it to our table.